Vice President-elect Kamala Harris has resigned from the Senate ahead of her inauguration as vice president, but she is not leaving the high chamber entirely. As VP, she will also serve as president of the Senate. But Harris's departure means the Senate will be without a black woman for the first time in 20 years. Governor Gavin Newsom chose California's Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, to take Harris's Senate spot. Even though Padilla will be California's first Latino senator, his pick has drawn criticism. I want to bring in Sophia Bollag. She is a California politics reporter covering the Newsom administration for the Sacramento Bee. Sophia, welcome. Great to have you with us. So how are Californians in general responding to Governor Newsom's pick of Padilla to replace Harris?
Yeah, so there are a lot of groups in California who were very pleased with the appointment of Padilla. He is California's first Latino senator, which is a big deal in a state that where the largest ethnic group is Latinos. As you mentioned a little earlier, some people were disappointed that Newsom did not pick a woman to replace Kamala Harris. Particularly, there was a lot of advocacy for him to pick another black woman to replace her in the Senate, and obviously he did not do that. Padilla was chosen in part because he's seen as someone who can be elected outright to this seat when he's up for re-election, because he has won statewide office before. As you mentioned, his immediately previous job was being California's Secretary of State, which is an elected position. So he's someone who's demonstrated he can be elected statewide in California.
And what can you tell us about the reports surfacing about critics of the governor gathering to support a statewide effort to recall him? What do we know about this, and what might happen next?
Yeah, so at this point, supporters of the recall effort are still in a signature gathering phase. They have to collect, I believe it's a little over 1.5 million signatures up and down the state of California. They've got a little bit more time to do that, and they've been, making steady progress. It's unclear at this point if they're going to actually meet the threshold that they need. The signatures have to be verified once they're turned in, and so they're going to need more than the bare minimum effectively in order to clear that threshold. So they're still in that sort of initial phase trying to get this recall effort on the ballot.
And also, I want to ask you about some of your reporting about the false promise of more COVID-19 vaccines. Can you explain what exactly the Trump administration did and how Governor Newsom is responding?
Yeah, so California officials, like state officials all over the country, were expecting the federal government to start releasing more vaccines. They were told by the federal government that they were going to start releasing a stockpile of vaccines, essentially, that they had been holding back so that there were enough second doses to give to people who had already received their first dose of the vaccine. Remember, both of the vaccines that have been approved require 2 doses to be fully effective. So initially, California officials were told that they would be getting basically an influx of vaccine as the federal government released those vaccines they had been holding back. And then we learned last week that there was not a stockpile. The federal government had already been sending those vaccines to states. And so basically, California is going to end up receiving fewer vaccines in the short term than it expected, which is making sort of logistical planning in terms of vaccinating Californians more difficult for officials here.
Certainly something California doesn't need. Now, Sophia, President Trump has made threats, as we know, to Democratic governors over federal funding. How will an incoming Democratic administration in Washington impact California? Will the state have a better chance at securing federal funding for disasters like wildfires and mudslides?
Potentially. Potentially. We do expect the relationship between California officials, all the elected statewide officials in California are Democrats. We expect them to get along much better with the Biden administration. But I should note that the Trump administration, despite those threats that they, made continuously, basically throughout his time in office, to withhold funding from California, they did still send quite a bit of aid to California. We've had a number of really devastating wildfire seasons, and the Trump administration has sent aid to help with those emergency efforts. I think part of the change that we're going to expect to see, and this is even apparent in just the initial, plans that the Biden administration has laid out, Biden's priorities in terms of spending money and where to spend money are much more aligned with California officials' goals. There's elements of Biden's sort of federal stimulus package that he is proposing, that he's going to ask Congress to approve, that align much more with what Gavin Newsom, the governor here, has been asking for, like more money for vaccine distribution and testing, and more, aid for individuals. So there's definitely more alignment in terms of their policy goals.
All right. Well, Sophia Bollag, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.